Today about preparing community organisations for extreme events. We've got some really upbeat activities and presentations today, and we're really working towards a whole of community approach where we can listen and hear and share from different perspectives about and think together about which ways we need to move forward to creating resilient community organisations and thereby a resilient community. My name is Heidi Chappelow. I hail from Newcastle and I'm working as Community Resilience Officer at Heidi Joint Organisation. I'd also like to warmly welcome Anni Griffiths from Central Coast Council Environmental Education Officer. Anni, would you like to do the next part?
Thank you and welcome. Before we proceed any further, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on here today and pay my respect to elders past, present and future, and welcome any Indigenous people who are here today as well. Just a few housekeeping things first of all. You always have to do those bits. Toilets unfortunately are downstairs, so just down in this area below basically the signing spot, if you haven't already found them. If you do need the lift, there is a lift there. Please, it's a little funky if you did like coming from a few hundred years ago, but if you have to push the button to get the lift to come up to you, keep your finger on the button, then you pull open the door, get in, and then push the button and keep your finger on the button until it goes back down, and then repeat it all at the other end. The emergency, if we do have an emergency, we've got an emergency exit right there, and out to the car park out there, that area is the meeting room. Hopefully with all these emergency personnel people, we should be covered. Finally, and I'm not doing this myself, as you can see we have Auslan interpreters here. So if you are speaking, can you please speak clearly and slowly so that we can make sure that they keep up with us. We're also recording today. So we had the recording will primarily be focused at the presenters and people at the front, but we have asked everybody to sign a release form just in case your image does end up in the back corner or something like that. So if you haven't already done that, can you please grab the release form out the front in the break? Or if you don't want to be filmed, if for some reason that's fine, can you please let us know so that we can make sure that you are not captured in any of the image, because we may be using it in different ways. I think that's all the housekeeping. So just a quick thing is from the council's perspective why we're here and what this is all about. Firstly, this is fantastic to be partnering with the Hunter Joint Organisation in presenting this workshop specifically for community organisations. We've been part of the Hunter Joint Organisation for quite a while and doing a whole lot of different programs, and I find this one a really, really exciting and really rewarding program that we're doing with them. Why is council really looking at this kind of thing? Why are we wanting to build preparedness and resilience in our communities? Well, I think that's pretty obvious. And I know with an audience like this, we're all aware that extreme weather events are occurring. They're occurring more frequently. They're occurring for longer. They're occurring more regularly and more intensely. So I think that we're all recognising that, and we have to start addressing this and getting our community ready for it, because with this happening all along more and more, there's not going to be, it's wonderful seeing all the people here today in uniform, but in an extreme weather emergency, we're not going to have our communities, there's just not going to be enough emergency personnel to go around the whole area and be there on everybody's door in an emergency. So we have to build it within ourselves. We have to be more prepared. We have to be more resilient. And And of all the community, or of all of our community, probably one of the most important parts of our community to be resilient is our community organisations. Because you are the people that our community in need is going to turn to. And if your doors are still shut because you've suffered through the flood or fire and don't have the ability to bounce back really quickly, your community has got nobody to turn to. So it's really, really important from our perspective to get our community organisations prepared for extreme weather events and resilient and ready to bounce back really quickly. So hopefully we'll do that today. As Heidi has said, it's a really action-packed sort of program that we've got today. But another really important part, I do a lot of these sort of workshops with community individuals and business, vulnerable community groups. And probably one of the most important things, as well as being prepared and being ready and resilient, a resilient community is a connected community. So a really big important part today is the networking component. So please, don't just sit with the people you know, get to know everybody in this room, get to know who are the people that you can turn to if your service is damaged, who's down the road with similar services or maybe resources that you could use, where could you turn to build up your preparedness. So really make the most of the networking here today. Just one final sort of housekeeping thing back to that from me is that later on we're going to have set up a whole lot of iPads. Central Coast Council has just developed a one-stop sort of emergency portal. It's still at the feedback session at the moment. We're just looking at it, working out what works, what's good, what isn't good. And you are the perfect group of people to have a look at it and to give us some feedback. So I'm just going to put some iPads out that are connected directly to this portal. It's still, as I said, at the draft stage and getting feedback. And there'll be a whole lot of post-it notes. Please, whatever feedback you've got, it'll be really well worth giving to us and well received. So that's it for me at this stage. I'll introduce Heidi and Steve Wilson from the Hunter Joint organisations who will be running the next session.
Thank you so much, Annie. Now, I was going to try and stand next to the interpreter so it was easier to fit in the frame, but I've got anxiety that my notes are over here.
That's all wheels. Just move that up.
Just move it?
Yep.
Thank you, Steve.
Heidi, just one last thing. I knew I'd come in housekeeping. We won't be stopping for morning tea as such, so please, the tea and coffee and snacks are here. Constantly get up and refill your glasses or have a glass of water and get something to eat as we go, because we won't be stopping again until lunchtime.
Yes. Thank you, Annie. Feel free to move about the space, even though it's a little bit squishy. And get a cup of tea, use the bathrooms, take your own breaks. So it's time to jump up for a moment. We've got a few minutes. The instruction is jump up, meet 3 people you've never met before, and find out something, and tell them something unlikely about yourself, and find that out about them. Ready? Oh, sorry. I brought a bell to call you back. Have a listen. Start on the bicycle.
Well, we did like one. Julie's one. Cam's collecting.
Are you involved in the emergency services?
How's the filming?
Or just here to...
Is it better now I'm in this position?
Yeah, it is better, but then again, so that it won't be too dark, the screen is quite bright. Can you take a look? It's still live. It's like that.
Oh yes.
Do you want me to
on the speakers?
Oh, that's it. I will.
Yeah, we can share the PowerPoint. I don't know.
Unless you want me to do it like that.
No, then you won't see the
Exactly.
It's the Auslan for us.
Yep. Okay.
Maybe we should go across from here. Where do you think is the better image?
I think it's definitely there. For the Should I stop? Heidi, I won't fit in there. So
What about just here?
it's too close.
Make it more low? Or does it go down? Yeah.
Very low, very basic. Animals.
I feel the earth move under my feet. I feel the sky cooling down. I feel my heart.
Volunteering. Good on you.
So I'd just like to find out who's in the room. Could you please raise your hand if you're from?
So I'm in one of the management teams. Hearing impaired,
So to get the sense of who's in the room, and have a little look around, could you please raise your hand if you are from a disability service organisation? Welcome, thanks for coming. Let's give them a round of applause. So would you please raise your hand if you're from a emergency service organisation? Give them a round of applause. Thank you for coming. Could you please raise your hand if you're from an aged care organisation? Welcome. Thank you for coming. What about neighbourhood centres? Look, seniors here. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Local government. Hello, let's give them a clap. State government. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Is there anybody who hasn't put their hand up yet?
Citizen, maybe?
We're community preschool.
Community preschools. Welcome. Anybody else who hasn't put their hand up yet? Yes? Where are you from?
Family Support Service.
Family Support Service. Welcome. Anybody else who hasn't put their hand up? Great, except my dad.
I'm also from the Deaf Society. I'm also from the Deaf Society. I'm a Deaf Liaison Officer, a volunteer here.
Last question. Who not in the capacity that they've come today, in this capacity or in a different capacity, who's a volunteer member of an organisation Any volunteers in the room?
Used to be, but not now.
Any organisation? Any volunteers of any organisation? Well, thank you to the volunteers. Moving forward, I'll give you a trick. See if I can run this. Oops, that's backwards. Okay, so we're just going to check if you're in the right workshop.
A bit late now.
So the purpose of today is to demystify resilience planning so that our organisations are better able to serve the needs of clients during and after extreme events like floods, fires, utility failures. Has anyone got a leak now? No, we're good. And I've got a few key takeaways. So we're going to improve our understanding of the role of community organisations in disaster management. We're going to gain a familiarity with the 6 Steps to Resilience framework. And the kind of familiarity that I'm hoping that we're going to achieve is that you go home and go, when you get an email about a particular opportunity or something, you go, that fits in the 6 Steps framework and it's a step 2 thing, and you don't have to go back to the computer. So you have a sense of what it's about, and if you want more information, then you know where to go as well. And the third thing that we're really hoping that you're going to walk away with is contact details of people who you can call to help get prepared for and respond to extreme events. Because in an emergency, we go to who we know. And so that's really the opportunity of today, is to get to know. You'll need the message page. I want to introduce the message page. Can everyone have a look for that yellow piece of paper? It's a 2-sided document. The one side has got the 6 steps on it. We'll look at that one first. So this is the one where hopefully you'll go home with a somewhat sketched out plan of things that you'd like to do for your organisation. And so during the day, during the course of the day, if you find an idea that you think, that's a good idea, we could use that, jot it down in the relevant space on that. And so work through that over the course of the day. Yeah, anybody who hasn't got one? Great. On the other side is probably worth having a quick look. That's key information for emergency contacts for your organisation. We'll fill that out together, well, in pairs and threes, a little bit later in the day. But you can look at the questions there and think about, start your mind turning over on that. Okay, the camera. You will need a camera. Anybody who has a phone, it's good to be ready to use your camera. If you've got business cards, pop them in your pocket because you'll need them. You don't have to have them, but it'll be handy. And emergency policy of your organisation. If you've got one, that's for your own reference, and a sense of humour. If you have a little look at this agenda, I don't need to go through sort of in a lot of detail, but I'd like to highlight that. Laser work. No, it doesn't work. That we've got a mixture of activities and speakers and discussions. So today is not going to be death by PowerPoint. It is really about getting up and moving around the space and also learning from peers. I think the battery just stops there. So we don't all know each other very well, and so like cats and dogs, I'd like to suggest a few ground rules. That we keep our phones on silent, anyone who needs to turn that down, and if you need to take a call, please take it outside. That we might be very excited and like to talk a lot, but we do have a lot to get through, and everybody here has a story to tell. So if you have a tendency to speak a lot, maybe think, shall I listen a little extra today? And if you have a tendency to listen a lot, maybe consider, shall I speak a little extra today? So speak and listen respectfully, and as Annie mentioned, grab a cuppa any time. You working? No.
Hello.
So So this is the session. Now that Steve has gone foraging in the thing, I have Steve.
Yep.
I have one of those. So if you can hold the
Well, I
space,
can start if you want.
you can start. I'll get my backup laser pointer.
Thank you, everyone. I work with Heidi at the Hunter Joint Organisation, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a bit of a couple of things. One, I'm going to, after I do this first exercise, I'm going to give an overview of some research that we did around 4 or 5 years ago, actually, specifically through the University of Newcastle with at-risk communities, so particularly vulnerable communities, and trying to understand what their risk perception and their preparedness for disasters was. So that will come in a minute. The thing I want to do first, though, I guess just to prepare your thinking for the day, it's a little bit of a scenario we put together. I'm just really going to read it to you. Feel free to shut your eyes and take yourself to the place I'm going to take you if you want. But really it's just to get you to think about the kinds of things that could possibly happen. And look, on the way here this morning, we were almost caught in traffic on the freeway because of a fire. And I must admit, we weren't prepared for that scenario. So yeah, things can pop out of anywhere, and we need to be aware. So this is really just to get you thinking, and we'll probably come back to this later in the day. Thank you, Heidi. So firstly, I'll read the scenario to you. Imagine it's Thursday lunchtime. The Bureau of Meteorology has been predicting all week the possibility that a major storm, an east coast low in fact, may form in your area. As you head back to the office with your lunch, you hear that forecast is correct. A severe east coast low is going to hit late Friday afternoon. The sky is already darkening to the south. As you go to bed Thursday evening, rain is starting to fall on the roof and the wind is picking up. You wake up late the next morning, realising your alarm hasn't gone off. You've got no electricity. You look out the window. Heavy rain is falling and the wind is strong enough to blow a dog off its chain. The storm has arrived early. You have to get to work, but the kids have just woken up too. Their alarms didn't work either, and they need to get to school. But that's okay. You can drop them off on the way to work. You're approaching the school gates and your phone beeps, one of those lovely alert tones. The school is closed for the day, as 2 large trees have fallen on some classrooms. You can't drop the kids at school. You manage to resolve the childcare issue, good luck with that, and arrive at work the long way because of fallen trees and power lines. It's hard to believe, but the wind is getting even stronger and the rain heavier. You discover that the power is out at work too. Only a fraction of the normal team is there because of the closed roads, or because they have to look after their kids because the school is closed. Friday is your biggest day, normally spent contacting and visiting clients to provide much needed support services before the weekend. You quickly realise you don't have the staff resources to visit everyone today, and even if you did, the weather and roads would make it impossible or unsafe to be on the roads. You pick up the phone to start calling clients so you can check on their welfare and let them know that you won't be able to get there today, but you hear nothing. The phones are down too, both landline and mobile. By this time, it's nearing lunchtime again. It's hard to believe it's only been 24 hours since you realised the storm was really going to hit. In that time, you've gone from a fully functioning office and team to not being able to deliver services to even a single client. Most of your colleagues who did make it in have now gone, worried they might not get home due to local flooding, to check on their own houses because they see no point in staying at work when there's nothing they can do. You realise you may as well go home too before it gets too late. You're extremely concerned about your clients, but there's nothing you can think of to do. You do find solace in the fact the storm is forecast to be gone by Sunday, when you can come back in to ring and check on everyone. Surely the phones and power will be back on by then. As you're rushing out through the raging wind and rain to your car, you hear a terrible shrieking sound from behind you. The entire roof of your building has been blown off, and the wind and rain is now soaking and pulling apart what remains inside. Everything you need to run your organisation is in that building. You realise quickly that it will be weeks, if not months, before you'll be up and running again. It's simply unbelievable. No one could have foreseen that this would happen. Surely there was nothing you could have done to prepare for a disaster like that. Or is there? Hopefully by the end of the day we'll be on the way to starting to think about that seriously. So as we were putting that together, I thought, wow, is that really possible? And only last weekend in Stockton, the roof blew off the nursing home. The flooding, the people not turning up to work, they're all very real things, and they do from time to time happen, and you'll see some examples of that today. Thank you. Now I'm going to start the death by PowerPoint. So, as I indicated, this is the results of some research we did, I think it was 2014, but I think it's still highly relevant to what we're talking about today. Newcastle University did this research for us, and what it did, it actually worked. They did focus group sessions with a range of different target audiences, and you can see here who they were. The lower ones there, we targeted low-income households, families with children under 5, people with a disability, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and elderly community members. Those were the target audiences that the focus groups were done for. The things that we were asking those groups, or the researchers were asking those groups, were what is their current level of risk perception about disasters? What is their level of planning, both at a broader planning level and a very practical level? What is their capacity to respond and recover to disasters? Primary means of communication, how do they get information, how do they want information to help them? And then, what are the barriers to communication as well? So I'm just going to give you an overview of the outcomes and finding of this research. It's a little bit small, so I'll read through them to a degree so you can help. But from the level of risk perception, how did people perceive the risk to them personally from disasters and their community? One of the key things that came out of that was direct experience with a previous natural disaster meant participants were more likely to be realistic in what they would, what might happen to them. But interestingly enough, many participants also had a heightened risk of disasters that were less likely to affect them. So they might live next to a bushfire-prone area, but they were rating tsunamis as the more of a threat to them and that kind of thing. So that disconnect between actual risk and what they were most likely to be exposed to is important. Overwhelmingly across all of those groups, heat wave was not seen as a particular risk to people. So in fact, people sort of brushed it off as not being a risk to them. So and that's really concerning, given that the heat waves have the potential to affect a whole range of different communities. There was a consistent idea of resignation in the face of disasters. Of what can we do? There's nothing I can do to prepare for that. So that was I guess something. This sort of work is really important in trying to overcome. And many expressed reliance on factors that are outside of their control to help them. That could be someone telling them that they needed to evacuate, someone coming to the door, or someone coming to rescue them. And we know that, as already been said this morning, that's not really ever going to happen. In terms of planning preparedness, some of those groups could articulate well thought out plans and messages, and particularly those in the 65 to 75-year-old age group, and particularly families with young children. They tended to think about this a little bit more. Across the other groups, there wasn't very much planning for disasters at all. Scarily, what thinking had been done was very ill prepared and would have put people in a lot of risk or danger. So, and I'll go through a couple of case studies in a moment. For many, planning was dependent on someone from emergency services telling them what to do. So that self-resilience, that self-planning was not really strong in the results that came through. And people with a disability were more likely to rely on someone not living with them. And that was a real issue when, in that scenario, you can't get out because of the disaster. You can't get to those people to help them. So that came through quite strongly with that group. So here's a couple of case studies just talking about that preparedness. And these are the actual verbatim, interview responses. So the facilitator says, so do you have a point at which you decided that's when you packed the car? And the lady says, yeah, I've packed it a few times. So what's the trigger? When's the time you think you need to do that? When I can see the flames coming. I kind of see the smoke, it's flames. So the facilitator says, so you wait till you can see the flames to actually pack the car. Yeah. So probably not that prepared. And certainly would put her in a very risky situation. The other one here is from another person, and I think it might have been, there was a 94-year-old man interviewed. I personally think if the bushfire comes, run from the bush, on the street. It seems simple to me. So, very actual, real quotes from people involved in this process. From a practical preparedness point of view, people on low incomes identified a lack of actual resources available to them to be prepared. And a really good example of that was cleaning leaves out of the gutters. And people, they don't have a ladder. They can't afford to go and buy a ladder from Bunnings, so how can they practically get up there and actually clean it out? So doing those very practical things around your house is actually a challenge for many people on low income. And I guess people living in social housing and those sorts of things are also saying the lack of maintenance and support is a big threat. They see that as a risk to them as well. Across all groups that were interviewed, knowledge about evacuation routes and evacuation centres was largely absent, so most people did not have any idea what would happen in that scenario and where they should go. And those with only a limited knowledge of the local area, so particularly the CALD communities, reported very low levels of practical preparedness. So for new arrivals into your area, there were very low levels of preparedness. People's capacity to respond and recover. Some of the key factors in people's ability to recover was really about relationships to a large degree. Informal support systems, developed social networks and past experience, access to materials and information were all really important things that help people get through disaster times. Those most unable to respond were those who were isolated, experienced communication difficulties, and those on low incomes were already coping with high levels of crisis. So if you're, if you're socially isolated, very hard to access that information, but you won't have those social networks that can help. People also expressed concern about their emotional capacity to cope. A lot of people were quite close to the edge in many circumstances, whether it be financially or socially, and this was just a crisis on top of that. They didn't think they'd be able to cope with it. And housing and food scarcity and security were major concerns. Many people only had a bar fridge, particularly low people on low income, so not being able to buy food or losing the food that you do have in the fridge because of power blackouts was a major concern for people. This is just the researchers put together a bit of a graph of people's preparedness across those categories and questions that are asked. Pretty intuitive. A green tick is good, a red cross is not good in terms of being prepared. So you can see there that across those groups, really, as I said, it was the families with young children had thought a little bit more about this. The people aged over 65 were actually quite well prepared and actually a really good resource to help local communities be prepared and respond to disasters. Often they maybe not be working anymore, they've got time, they know the area, they know the community, and actually rather than being looked at an at-risk group, they could be looked at as a group to actually help in these times. Communication was the other question we asked. So this answers the questions about how people currently get information. Everyone actually surprisingly had a fridge magnet with the local emergency numbers on it on their fridge. Everyone was quite familiar with that. But as you can see, from that point onwards, it diverges significantly. People will use this is the predominant ones that people use, and you can see that you can't really. What this tells us is you cannot rely on one source of communication or mainstream communication to get messages to the groups that we're trying to target. How would they like to get their information? Everyone, I'm so pleased to see all the uniforms because they want you to come to their door when there's an emergency and help them get out. Obviously not a realistic expectation, but certainly that's what people are wanting to see. Interestingly enough, a couple of, you can see there's text messages there or the mobile phone ringing, what some of the options were for many people. For new arrivals, for CALD communities, the air raid siren, they were used to that kind of system from their previous country, and so they thought that would be a good idea as well. One of the main things actually that came out of this, and we're not saying we're doing this, this is just how they necessarily understand what people are thinking. But for people over 65, calling them on the mobile during a disaster is not the preferred means of communication. They only turn it on for emergencies, and that doesn't include natural disasters. So got to pick up the grandkids, and I need to turn it on for that. So often those phones are turned off. So that in itself was a really interesting finding that we came up with. So the recommendations out of the research, and I think these are really appropriate today. The researchers identified the following: the development of specific strategies to support at-risk groups in disaster preparation and response and recovery, in addition to the mainstream communication strategies that are out there. So they do need more tailored support. The other one was to develop and support loose local support networks designed to include those most at risk. So actually bringing them into those local networks. So particularly I mentioned the isolation was a key factor. Bringing people into those loose local networks is a way of engaging them and helping them get prepared. Improving coordination between human service providers, so community organisations, community service organisations, and emergency services regarding at-risk groups, which is a very big part of how we got to being here today. These recommendations kind of led to this project. Communication and warning strategies must reflect the multiple channels through which different groups get their information. So as I said, you can't rely on one sort of communication method. You need to look at the ones that are most suited to the audience. And further investigation on effective coordination processes for community support organisations to reduce the impact of disasters on these communities, which is what we're trying to do today, is actually link in with some of those other resources and tools that are available to try and help you more engage with your people and prepare them for these kind of scenarios. Thank you. Thank you.
Bravo.
So I've got a question.
Yeah.
If I wouldn't mind. With the low income and that, did that also include homeless? Go out and to engage with the homeless?
No, one of the other recommendations I did put up today was to do that to other groups. So we, had a small budget. We were able to get this sort of focus on this. So we're really piloting the methodology. But yes, other groups, it would be great to extend that to other groups, but also other areas. So this was Central Coast and Lake Macquarie we did this in. So I would love to see that extended more broadly across our region as well to get a better understanding of the geography and also the different groups.
I was just curious, seeing it's a growing issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We'll just take 2 questions and then we'll keep moving. Yes.
Steve, one issue, Steve, I guess my name. Steve, one of the issues that has changed since that study was done is the NBN, where people used to have a landline, now they're relying on the NBN, which is relying on a computer network. So those folks who used to have a landline are now relying on having power as well. And related to that is that a lot of folk, although they say they want to listen to the radio to get their information, many don't have a battery operated radio. So they'd like to, but they won't be able to if there's no power.
Yes. And I think many will be using the phone apps for radio and things like that as well, and that's going to draw your phone battery down fairly quickly.
Or their car, or the car radio.
Yeah.
I just have one question. During, I think we sort of had an example of that a couple of years ago on the coast. And I noticed there was a couple of patches where big places had generators that could actually run there, and I think half of us sort of went there and had all of our food. Can I ask you, does any of the services tap into that? Like, I'll use Wyoming McDonald's as an example, because that was one of the main hubs, as was East Gosford. Would there ever be a communication process through these chains that actually are available due to the generation for, like, the generators?
I think that's the kind of thing you might start to talk about today. I think this is a big part about talking to each other. Not everyone has to reinvent the same wheel with the stuff to be prepared. In fact, that research showed the relationships and the connections are really important. So that kind of idea, I think, park that for later in the discussions you're having.
Bravo, thank you. Thank you very much, Steve, for really informative and interesting rundown on that study. And yes, some of the things that we're going to come up with today are questions or suggestions rather than answers. And so something we might think, oh, is this a possibility? Well, we can then see if somebody has done X, Y, or Z. I'm going to give you a rundown on the piece of work that I've been doing is my community resilience role at Hunter Councils. We had a project, it's called Understanding Resilience Capability in the Community Services Sector, and I've done that through evaluating the implementation of the ACOS 6 Steps to Resilient Community Organisations Toolkit, which we're going to be looking at and working through today. The background of the project is that the Australian Council of Social Services built a business continuity planning tool specifically designed and tailored to the needs of community organisations. That was a couple of years ago, 2015 I think it came out. And this project was it hadn't really been tested and put through its paces. So this project, there have been some other studies, but this one was to deliver some workshops supporting community organisations with understanding and implementing the 6 steps to resilience, and then to come back and evaluate, well, was it effective? That's been my job since March. And I've had a great time going around and interviewing community service managers, and they were really excited to talk, and that was great because I found out some things that I wasn't expecting to find out. All in all, the toolkit was well supported. People liked what was in the toolkit, and they didn't like the idea, especially of making shortcuts. For example, well, if you make a shortcut, then when do you go back and finish it off? What I did find is that the organisations who had done the most in terms of resilience weren't the ones who had the most workshops. They were the ones who'd been really burned in a disaster. So there's a really powerful, motivating learning experience of actually being in a disaster, and that's what's driving the changes in resilience. That's really good, but it's not effective for getting ready across the sector. Nobody would wish a hand on the hot plate learning model who's been on it, would wish it, who's been through that experience, nobody would wish it on somebody else. So what I went into then was to understanding, well, what are the contributing factors and what are the inhibiting factors to moving this forwards. I was astounded by the reach and the commitment in the community sector. From the 9 organisations that I interviewed, they had 417 staff, mostly were permanent, part-time or casual. They had over 500 volunteers. Those volunteers are getting harder to find. They had over 5,000 clients who they could visit in their home. And these clients are the people who are the more vulnerable people in the community who will need more support in an emergency situation. So these 9 organisations have those relationships with those people. And over 40,000 total centre visits in a year. So this is a really big number, indicating the amount of trust that the community has in these community organisations. One thing is the trust, the other thing is the person-centred skill sets that we in the community sector know. And the third thing is the information, because in the community sector we keep that info, like we have the information, we have the relationships and we have the skill sets. And they're something that an emergency service organisation cannot know. That's where the community service sector is really a vital part in the whole disaster prevention, preparedness, response and recovery, because we need to partner together with the emergency sector, because there's stuff that the emergency sector just can't reach. I was struck by the profound reach and commitment in these organisations, and it's only a small slice. So here's a few quotes. With our clients, we have an assurance that we will deliver meals at all times or get meals to them. Hence the importance of an effective disaster plan. So a commercial food service provider would not have that commitment to show up, rain, hail or shine. That's the commitment of a community service organisation. We do a risk assessment on people in their homes and we put strategies in place, such as vital call and key entry locks. So there is groundwork and we just need to expand on all of that. So there's a lot of infrastructure already in place in terms of those emergency planning embedded in the community service sector. And it's, okay, maybe we're 50% there, maybe we're 70% there, but it's already happening. It just needs to be expanded on. Neighbourhood and community centres are really well placed because our structures, our skills, our training and our networks are already there, and because we deal with individual crises every day. So, what got in the way? This is a picture of a big fish and a little fish, and I've sort of named the big fish, little fish syndrome as something that's operating in the background that is inhibiting organisations moving forwards. So here's a couple of the themes that came through. There were more that came through in the study, but I've just pulled out a couple to highlight. There's not a lot of extra time we have to fit things in. I work a few days, that's the manager, and a lot of staff are casual or permanent part-time on limited hours. I hate to say this, but what would bring this home is if there was a disaster which goes back to the hand on the hot plate. The industry is suffering from deregulation, and it pits us against the open market. Smaller organisations are being amalgamated and swallowed up and taken over because they can't compete. This is where the big fish, little fish dynamic comes in, and it also relates to where we need to be careful in terms of how we change the structures of things so as not to accidentally have unintended consequences and make this worse. I feel like some providers are bullying clients into choosing them. Organisations need to learn to work together and support each other better. It's a neighbourhood centre manager. Is this ringing true for anyone in the room? A couple of years. Yeah. So where to? Just my little picture. And what I've got here is the yellow arrows going around in a clockwise circle represent all of the strengths, all of the things that are an inherent capability inside the community sector. The little red arrows going anti-clockwise, they're the things dragging us back. And if we want to move this forward, we just reduce the things dragging us back, and this thing is going to roll. So it might seem like rocket science, but actually disaster planning is about a duty of care for our staff, our volunteers and our clients. And this food service provider said it really clearly. They said, we've always had work health and safety, but it only covers what happens at the workplace, not what would happen in the case of emergency. So there is an intuitive step. It is a bigger scope, but it is part of what we need to do to be looking after ourselves, our staff, our volunteers and our clients. So when Steve and Sam and Annie and I got together to have our first meeting to plan this day, I was thinking, well, I know this 6 steps to recovery is a really substantial process. What can we do in a day? And I thought back and I looked back through the interview notes, and people said, it was amazing listening to the stories of other people. It was amazing meeting other people. I got to start to talk about planning something with another organisation. And I didn't realise how much we were going to be involved in an emergency situation. So I've designed today to maximise those 3 things. So please, meet each other, share your story, and together let's begin a new community and begin a new story. Oh, I did it. Okay, that's the end of Death by PowerPoint for just a moment. Check how we're going on time. Pretty good. Now, we're getting into the 6 steps activity. This is the part where we're going to get our hands on to 6 steps and get familiarised with what we need to do. I'm going to introduce the instructions. Hands on 6 steps. Now 6 steps, I've actually realised through the course of this research that it's not really 6 steps, it's more like 6 legs, hence the beetle. Because it might not be the step 1 that you actually start with. It might be step 4 that offers itself an opportunity in your organisation, and you can get started with step 4. And then something comes up in step 2 and you think, oh, let's have a go with step 2. So like a little beetle, you can move your organisation forward in an intuitive way rather than going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 legs. These are the 6 legs steps. The first one is leading resilience. That's about getting the weight of your organisation on board. The second one is about building networks, because in an emergency, we can make decisions much more quickly when we know each other. The third one is knowing your risks. While you never get really struck with the disaster that you planned for, by planning for the disaster that you're likely to have, it's less likely to be a disaster. Is that confusing? Okay, good. We should know the hazards that we are exposed to. Have those conversations. Step 4, managing your risks. If you understand the risks and put in a control, then that'll be really good. Step 5, preparing others. Everybody in the organisation and in the community needs to be part of preparedness. And like Steve said in his scenario, there was nothing we could have done to get ready for this event. Well, there really is, and those clients could have been better equipped in the first place. And that's the role of where we can work together to find out what steps to take today. And that's also in education. What are the resources available? What education is available? What are the gaps? Step 6, learning and inspiring. No toolkit, no plan is good without testing. It needs to be put out of the drawer and run through its paces at least once a year, and we've got to have a talk about that. The toolkit online, this is the website. I'll read it out because I can see people taking notes. It's www.resilience.acos.org.au. And if you just put in ACOS 6 steps, it will come up. So the toolkit can be a little bit awkward to navigate online. What I'd like to highlight for you is that there's a benchmarking tool where you go and have a look where you're at already for your organisation. There's a lot of questions, you answer them. The link's on the top. There's the online learning modules, and they're for reading through. It opens up page by page by page, and there's great information in there. But, get yourself a cup of tea and get your head around it. Risk register, that's for step 3, understanding risks. That's come out of a 2013 study by the Australian Council of Social Services, and they looked up and really thought about like 120 different risks that community organisations might be exposed to. So that's a great place to go for step 3, understanding risks. And then there's a disaster plan template. If you really just have 20 minutes and there's nothing else you do, go in and print out or download the disaster plan template. There's one copy of that on each table so you can have a quick flick. And that's the short way to get through get through it and get across it is in the template. And we're going to have an activity which will be fun. This will be about thinking about what's in front of you, but also about thinking about what's in your mind and making up some stuff as well. So it's a combination. Activity number 1, hands-on 6 steps. And whether you're in the community sector or the emergency services sector, these are general information that will be really useful to have your head around. So so don't worry if you're not a community service person. So you will need your message page, the yellow one. You'll need that one and the slide with the 6 steps on it. You will need the group activity pack. Rowy's got those and he's just handing them around. With your table, can you choose a table facilitator? And while you're waiting for your pack, maybe tidy up the table a little bit because you need to spread out on the table.
Thank you.
Now, ladies and and gentlemen, I've got an announcement. This wasn't planned, but Shane was going to be talking just after this session, but he's with the RFS, and there's a watch and act on for the fire on the highway. So Shane's going to have to go shortly, and so in a minute when he comes back from taking his phone call, we're going to interrupt our chatting activity and Shane can deliver his material before he leaves for the day. So, of course. True life emergency. Hi, Tim.
You're amazing.
So with the 6 steps pack, ladies and gents, can I just have your attention for a moment? Tidy your table up a little bit because you're going to make some mess. And we want groups of maybe 5, so if you only got 3 people around the table, that's okay. But you know, if you're feeling a bit lonely at your table, feel free to go and join another group. So tidy up because we're going to spread out your 6 coloured pages. Here, could you please wave them above your head? Yep, the 6 coloured pages, spread them out across the table.
We have the envelope. Like an instruction, I imagine.
So we spread out those 6 coloured sheets, and once the 6 coloured sheets are out, then in the little brown envelope, there's about 10 or 12 little activities that would fit into those 6 categories. So spread out the activities, and your job is to have a quiet think about them first, so we don't end up in ruckus. Pull them out, and Shane's about 10 seconds away, so pull them out, hand them around, and we'll welcome Shane.
Everybody is
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, did everyone find their little brown envelope? All the tables have got the brown envelope and got the hearts out. Awesome. Now, I'd like to welcome to the lectern Shane Gearing.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Shane.
Good morning. Apologies for messing up the agenda a little bit, but I've got to blast off back to the Fire Control Centre. I've been summoned by the manager back to the office. We've got that escalating bushfire incident at Killingworth that's just closed the M1 northbound, so anyone that's going back to Newcastle might struggle at the moment. And we've got a couple of helicopters inbound. So just to set the scene in terms of my little quick presentation, I just wanted to show some images in the background here. Those that are local may remember the Rutley's fire. Yep, October 17, 2013. Just set the scene a little bit. 35-degree temperatures. Leading up to this particular event, we had a number of bushfire events across New South Wales, more particularly on the coast. On this particular day, we had northwesterly winds, 41 k's, gusting to 67 kilometres per hour, and relative humidity was 16%, so very low humidities. We had a number of resources that have been committed locally to other little fire events, but we'd also sent some resources up to Newcastle, that's where I was at the time of this incident going down. At around 15:30, so 3:30 in the afternoon, we had a fire that jumped out of bushland near the Pacific Highway, Rutleys Road at North Doyleson, and started to threaten properties. You'll see a number of images up on the screen here which identify the fire event itself, some of the ramifications, the aftermath, and some of the devastation that occurred. But just to go through some of the Section 44 report on that particular event, at around just after the event commenced at 15:30, the fire had made a run from Rutleys Road and was making its way towards Catherine Hill Bay Township. At around 1700, 5 o'clock, we had around 25 firefighting appliances, many of which from RFS and also Fire Rescue New South Wales assisting, and over 100 firefighters at this time jumping from property to property to try and protect as many assets as they could. Many of you would have understood that the Big T Roadhouse, which had only just been updated and rebuilt, had actually been totally destroyed, and some of the pictures up here, that's just near the Big T, just south of. We had a number of recycling facilities, properties on Carter's Road that had actually been damaged as a result of the fire, some businesses, and luckily at 15:30 the schools at Lake Mamora had actually finished for the day. So if you can imagine Carter's Road being one way in, one way out, we have an electrical substation at the start of the road. We have Lake Mamora Public School, Lake Mamora High School. At the time they didn't have St Bridget's Catholic College, but they do have now, and St Brendan's, also the Bush and preschool. So in excess of 2,000 people in one road, and luckily it happened a half an hour post all those students going home. As you can appreciate, this fire did make a significant run. Pacific Highway was closed. Woolworths development was affected at Lake Mamora. They'd probably done a roaring trade on that day because we had thousands of people as spectators watching the fire event. Nonetheless, oblivious to the issues that were about to escalate. Unfortunately, one male resident on Carter's Road lost his life, had a heart attack as a result of trying to protect his home, and we had a number of ambulance officers and firefighters that tried to get access to this individual and threatened their own lives at the time. We had a number of emergency warnings that were actually issued, particularly around North Doyleson, Gwandolin, Lords Wharf, and at around 21:30, which is 9:30 at night, we had a number of relocation points established, one at Doyleson RSL and one at Swansea RSL. They were considered two evacuation centres which were allowing people that couldn't get into Gwandolin and couldn't get into Chain Valley Bay. As you could appreciate, those communities being isolated, Point Wilsoncroft had a number of students, 180 in fact, and we had 3 wheelchair-bound people that couldn't get out of Gwandolin. So from a resilience point of view and recovery and also adapting to those issues, Canangra Drive in particular was closed down. I actually drove Canangra Drive on that evening, and we had power lines across the road, power poles damaged, and we actually drove through fire at about 10:30 at night, which was pretty much going straight over the top of us, in and out of Gwandolin. So it was dangerous to us. It would have been even more dangerous to the community. So, as you can appreciate, there was a bunch of speculation that was going on just through the magnitude of this incident, a growing, escalating, transient fire, which was difficult to keep up with. From a visibility point of view, we had a couple of aircraft working, water bombing. I was actually coming back from Newcastle. I was up on the Newcastle fire, protecting the Newcastle airport, flying air attack. And when I flew over Hexham Bridge and looked back towards Catherine Hill Bay, all I could see was flames going over the top of the hill. It was quite a sight. As soon as I landed at Summerlin Point, I was summoned back to the Fire Control Centre, where I was then tasked to go and check Catherine Hill Bay pub, because there was speculation that Catherine Hill Bay pub had actually burnt down, and as you can appreciate, there was so many devastated people across the Central Coast. When I arrived at Catherine Hill Bay, established that there was a number of assets that had been damaged. Catherine Hill Bay pub wasn't one of them. I also was tasked to basically run the fire edge and see where the fire had actually extended to. And it had extended all the way into Canangra Drive, up to parts of Norwood's Wharf, and pretty much made its way all the way to Catherine Hill Bay, where we'd actually done a hazard reduction a year prior to. That hazard reduction certainly did its job. It protected a number of assets along Flowers Drive, which was pleasing to see. So as you can appreciate, we had a number of people that were relocated from their homes. Many parents couldn't get to their students at Gwandolin Public School, couldn't get home, couldn't get back into Chain Valley Bay. Isolated communities, Valhalla Village in particular, at Chain Valley Bay. We had a number of residents that couldn't even get north to Swansea. They had to take the long way around to the M1. And we had power lines down and a bunch of infrastructure that was actually damaged as a result of the fire event. Namely Catherine Hill Bay community facilities. There were some of those. There was pump stations threatened. There was towers threatened, communications towers. And of course the Big T Roadhouse, which was totally destroyed. And some of those pictures were depicted. So you can see National Parks Depot there at Lake Marmora was also affected. We had some of our firefighters try to save us whatever they could. And obviously, you know, the sheer devastation, the aftermath of this fire went on for many weeks. We had the community very much focused on, you know, preparing themselves for, you know, what was to come in terms of that recovery. Getting the power lines fixed as quick as possible was the biggest thing the next morning. And I know, you know, at 0500 in the morning, the focus was on trying to get the roadway into Canangra Drive cleared so that members of the public can actually go back home. The next day extended into Chain Valley Bay emergency warnings. We had a number of properties threatened there. We had a southerly change that evening, which then pushed the fire towards Rafferty's Resort. Rafferty's Resort was actually evacuated at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we also had emergency warnings that were set out for to the north of Catherine Hill Bay, Norwood's Wharf, Murray's Beach and Swansea themselves. The next day I was tasked to fly all the way to Swansea and see what was in the path of this fire event. The next day luckily we had easing conditions in the morning, but then we had that nor'easter that came through and then changed the fire again. So it started to push the fire towards Gwandolin and then into Chain Valley Bay. So this fire took almost 48 hours to actually get a handle of in terms of where we were going to put in backburns and what we had to protect, and then assess the aftermath of the fire event. We actually revoked, which means when we go section 44, you actually initiate the declaration of emergency. We actually revoked on the 27th of October. So it took 10 days for us to in essence, clean up and make sure that we're in a position where we could safely say that the community was safer than what it was on the 17th of October. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I think it's fair to say that this particular event changed the community in terms of how it looks at bushfire, its preparation, you know, the construction of asset protection zones, where we put our fire trails in, how we engage with the community in terms of community engagement, and what their level of preparation is from a housekeeping point of view. It's fair to say that not much has changed in terms of the accessibility to these isolated communities. That's very, very difficult. You can't just put new roads in, but you can certainly look at strategies should this occur again. and how we can actually get the community out, or what we could be doing a little bit better into the future to better prepare the communities themselves. I think from our perspective as a combat agency, all organisations work collaboratively, cooperatively. There was lots of communication between the various infrastructure service providers that pretty much geared us up to try and get some level of normality back to the community as quick as possible. So that was the Rutley's fire.
Thank you so much, Shane. It seems like you've got a busy afternoon on.
Maybe.
Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to have to leave you all. Thank you. Good luck. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Oh, yes.
I was, sorry, a little bit emotional watching that, because I live up at Bay North. So I was in that fire, and you guys did an awesome job. The communication was exceptional. We always knew what was happening, even when our phones went down and things like that. And there was a lot of people in the area that put their boats in, and actually that's how I got home. That I was actually able to get to Chain Valley South and jump in the boat, and someone took me home. But people were actually doing that like along the lake, just so people could get food and that people were safe and they could get home. So yeah, scary, and that's why I'm here today, because that really did scare me. And I work at a local neighbourhood centre, and I just thought this is a great way to be able to, because the community really wanted to be able to help. So, so and you never think something like that would happen. I had my phone in one hand, ringing my boss to say I couldn't come to work that day, and the other was a hose squirting down my house because there was leak and was coming over. So really scary stuff. And the Carter's Road situation is still ongoing. It is still a huge concern. And has been a lot more talk and about it since then, but still no access road. But it's definitely put it on the map.
Yeah, for sure.
So, especially now there's another high school in that road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to have you. So, jumping sideways, we're going to do the six steps, hands-on 6 steps activity. So, have a little look and see if you can match up the steps that you've got with the. Just do the matching game. And you've got about 5 minutes. There's 5 minutes, folks. This is a short version.